I pulled open the glass door against the glaring Saturday morning sun. The heavily windowed walls offered little relief from its brightness as I blinked and looked around the lobby. Dominic sat at his desk across from the front counter. 1 month before, I had watched Dominic on the first night of class as he stood at the front of the studio and introduced the defense system in which he would be training us. The students stood in a row in front of him, dressed the same way he was in sneakers, black t-shirts with the royal blue Krav Maga logo on the chest, and loose, lightweight black pants. Krav Maga is not like traditional martial arts, he had explained. Those involve sparring, a back and forth, a focus on skill. Krav Maga is about dropping somebody, knocking someone out within 10 seconds so you can get away. He met the eyes of each student in the line in front of him. His voice was calm, assured, serious. I had watched him, captivated, as he demonstrated kicks and punches and used knees and elbows on the punching bag at the front of the room as we students watched in silence. Despite the subject matter, there was no bravado in his countenance. I had seen from the pictures and accompanying labels hanging in the lobby that Dominic instructed traditional martial arts as well as Krav Maga. While I had never taken any myself, I sensed in him the understated confidence I had observed before in martial artists, an exquisite self-possession and understanding of their capabilities, the assurance such that there was no need to prove anything to anyone. It was like they had power over their own power. It served them rather than the other way around. There was no compulsion to use it, to put it on display. It was just there, second nature, if it was ever needed. Dominic looked up at my entrance. "Hi, Jackie." I smiled at him and glanced at the clock. Saturday morning class was optional, a makeup class for those who missed any of the 3 sessions held during the week or who just wanted an extra review. I was only about 5 minutes early, but there didn't seem to be anyone else around. He followed my gaze. "You're the only one here so far. People often trickle in around starting time on Saturdays. You can have a seat if you want, or go on in and start warming up." I sat on the bench perpendicular to his desk, and he smiled and turned back to his computer. I didn't need to look at Dominic to feel the way he was affecting me. It happened just from being in the same room with him. I'd stand at the front of the room and watch as he stood at the front of the room, and the skill, control, focus of the lightning flashes of movement, the cracking thuds that seemed effortless to him, and feel the raw heat in my core. Every movement he executed was exactly what was called for, nothing more, nothing less. He didn't execute power just for the sake of executing power. Power was cultivated in him so deeply that it simply came out when it was called for. I wanted to fuck him so badly I could hardly stand still. 5 minutes later, he glanced at the clock. Maybe people had a little too much partying on a Friday night, he chuckled as he stood up. I've never had attendance this low on a Saturday. "Yeah, I imagine you want to cancel," I babbled, standing nervously. Dominic shrugged. "It's up to you. You can certainly take off if you'd like. If you want to stay, I'll work you." A shiver went through me, and I tried not to shudder visibly. I glanced around, not sure if I did want to take the studio with Dominic all by myself. I knew his focus was strictly professional, and I might end up making a fool of myself as I practically drooled over him. Okay, if you don't mind," I responded, my mouth appearing to ignore all the considerations that had just run through my mind. "No, come on in," he said, leading me into the studio. I moved to the far end toward the supply room and set my bag and purse down on the bench. As we began stretching, my breath quickened. The training hadn't even begun, and already I knew this was a mistake. I wasn't going to be able to handle this kind of undivided attention from Dominic. Even if he were interested in what I was, which I had no reason to believe he was, the studio's walls were made of glass, making the view from the street wide open. He wasn't about to fuck me with that kind of visibility. I had to get out of there. "Okay, you remember the way we learned early in the week to defend against a chokehold?" Dominic asked. "Yeah," I answered, clearing my throat. Dominic approached me, and I almost backed up, not trusting myself if he touched me. "Let's try it up against the wall." I was painfully aware of my ragged breathing and the wetness between my legs as Dominic leaned into me, wrapping his hands around my neck and pushing me back against the wall. I snapped my hands up and slammed my forearms into his, breaking the grip. "Good," he said, stepping back. "Do you remember the series we learned earlier this week?" He demonstrated in the air the series of punches, kicks, and elbow slams to get out of a headlock and render the assailant to the ground. I nodded. Okay, let's try it. Dominic fitted his arm around my neck from behind and held firmly. My breath caught, and I almost pressed back against him. I caught myself and mimed the series, stopping each move just short of actual impact with him. My breath was ragged when I finished. The tingling in my pussy had reached the point of distraction. Are you okay? Dominic asked. Yeah, I squeaked out, almost wincing at the hoarseness of my voice. I cleared my throat. Fine, go right ahead. He backed up. You want to grab some water? I nodded and walked over to my bag. I'm going to grab some gloves, he said, moving to the supply room a few feet away. He opened the door to the supply room and disappeared through it as I stared at it. I swallowed. As if drawn by a magnet, my feet began to step toward the room. The door was open, and I could hear Dominic rummaging around inside as I approached. I reached the door and silently stepped through it. Dominic had his back to me. He pulled a pair of gloves from the top of a pile and turned, stopping when he saw me. I was already in the room where I wasn't supposed to be. There was no way to back out gracefully now. For a few seconds, there was silence. I want you to... My voice, already tiny and faltering, failed me after those 4 words. Dominic took a step forward, his expression questioning. He raised his eyebrows and cocked an ear toward me. You want what? My breathing was uneven. I felt like I did when I was already close to orgasm. The intensity wasn't lending itself to articulation. I moved forward as well. I want... My voice halted again, but this time only for a split second. I want you to fuck me. I whispered it, knowing I was barely audible, and looked down at the ground, my cheeks flaming. I felt Dominic's eyes on me and told myself the worst he could do was say no, and I could turn around and leave and never come back. The all-encompassing fixation of wanting him overruled humiliation in me as the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Dominic's motions were deliberate as he moved toward and then past me. I didn't move. The door closed. A quiet, solid thud as I sensed he was still in the room with me sent a jolt of heat through me that almost made me dizzy. I barely breathed as I started to turn around. But he was already back in front of me. He moved in so that he was almost touching me, close enough that I felt weak, but not actually making contact. He looked down at me. You want me to fuck you? He repeated. His tone was neutral.